Recently, an enchanting spell seemed to have woven itself around Esther, causing her path to cross with Xavier's time and time again. After their unexpected encounter at the hospital, it took only a week until their next one. Esther had just returned to New York from a business trip, and she had agreed to have dinner with Austin at a seafood restaurant. She had finally convinced him to stop pursuing her romantically and hoped to use the meal as an opportunity to cement their platonic friendship. About halfway through the night, Esther stood up to use the restroom and discovered that Xavier was seated directly behind her. He was eating with a beautiful woman, and Esther was immediately reminded of a stray comment Jack had made about a wealthy family trying to set Xavier up with their daughter. As Esther's mind wandered, Xavier looked up, and they locked eyes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Intrigue gnawed at her. Xavier was a man of few words, notorious for his icy aloofness, and she was eager to eavesdrop on his dinner and see if the young woman was able to coax more warmth out of him than Esther had been able to. Unfortunately, when she returned from the bathroom, Xavier's table was vacant. Then, on the day of Jonathan's birthday, Esther arrived and stepped out of her car at the exact moment Xavier did. It seemed silly to let him go first, so they walked in together without so much as a word. Esther secretly reveled in the possibility that people might think they had come together. Inside Jonathan's penthouse, all eyes were on the door in anticipation of Xavier and his mysterious +1. When Esther walked through the door and she and Xavier immediately went separate ways, the excitement drained from the room. Nancy smiled as Esther made a beeline for her. "Maria, look at you in this beautiful white dress. You're practically a bride already." She turned to Jonathan and handed him a small box. "Happy birthday, big man. Though it seems a little unfair that I had to get you a gift when I already gave you Maria." She winked at Jonathan, and he accepted her gift with a grateful smile. Suddenly, the thom chimed in. "Let me guess. It's perfume." Esther shrugged, and a playful smile danced on her lips. "I considered it, but Maria confessed she had a particular fondness for his primal scent, so I designed a tie clip for him instead." Jonathan's laughter echoed through the room, and his gaze locked on Nancy. "Is that so, Maria?" Esther put her arm around Nancy's shoulder, and her eyes twinkled with mischief. "Big time. She claims it awakened something deep inside her." "Esther!" The word was half gasp, half laugh, as Nancy playfully pushed her away. In the ensuing scrap, Nancy's dress shifted slightly and revealed a hickey on her collarbone. Esther's eyes widened. "Looks like somebody's been busy." The color rushed to Nancy's face, and she swatted at Esther again. Laughter filled the room, and everyone gathered a drink before making their way to Jonathan's private rooftop for dinner. Amid a lush garden blanketed by fairy lights, they found a grand stone table littered with carafes of the finest red wine and countless plates of immaculately prepared food. After they ate, the chef brought out a cart with an elaborate cream cake. Above it were two robotic companions, Zahara and Aries. Nancy's surprise echoed across the garden. "Zahara? But how?" Jonathan shrugged. "I liberated her from your dorm." "And just how did you manage to fetch my things without my knowledge?" "I might have told your building manager that I suspected you of stealing company secrets." Nancy gasped and smacked his shoulder. Beside her, Esther admired the twinkling lights and narrowed her eyes at Jonathan. "Jonathan, this little soiree of yours seems quite romantic. A little out of character, no?" He responded with a playful chuckle. "And what, according to you, should my style be?" Esther's eyes wandered to the inscription on Aries' shoulder. "I always imagined you as more of an ironclad, god of war type." The chef finally finished lighting the 30 candles, and the thom cut in. "Time to sing, people!" Nancy led them in an intimate rendition of Happy Birthday, and amid the enchantment of the candlelit tableau, Jonathan's eyes remained fixated on Nancy. When they finished singing, he blew out the candles with one powerful breath and turned to her with a determined grin. As Nancy wondered what he was thinking, Latham spoke up again. "What did you wish for, Jonathan?" "You're about to find out." Esther gasped. "Don't say it or it won't come true." "Just watch me." Nancy's mind raced, but Jonathan's subtext was inscrutable. In a flash, he closed the distance between them and abruptly sank to one knee. Shock rippled across her face as she took in the scene before her. She suddenly noticed the attention to detail. Jonathan was wearing a tux, and the dress he had picked for her was white and lacy. If it hadn't been cut mid-thigh, it would have resembled a wedding gown. Jonathan drew a black velvet box from his pocket and swung the lid open to reveal a diamond ring. It was intricate and feminine, and bore the unmistakable signature of Maxine Dier. Nancy locked eyes with him, and his voice came out a velvety baritone, his gaze blazing with sincerity. "Maria, my old self-imagined marrying as a distant reality, a luxury I may not even live long enough to enjoy. But being with you has shattered those illusions. I've realized that timetables and preconditions are constructs, and they can be torn down as quickly as they're built up. All that matters to me now is making you my wife." His voice dropped to a heartful whisper, only for her. "Please forgive my audacity. I know we haven't been together that long, and I can't say whether I'll see my 32nd year. But however many days I have left, I'm certain that I want to spend them with you." Suddenly, his voice grew stronger. "None of us can predict the future, but I can promise you this. I will shield you from the harsh realities of the world with every ounce of my strength and intelligence. Whether I'm here or not, I vow that you'll never have to sacrifice your dreams, and every choice you make will be guided by your heart." His gaze bore into hers. "My darling Maria, I love you more than I thought was possible. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Silence descended over the scene, as if the entire world was holding its breath. As Nancy took in the image of Jonathan kneeling before her, waves of emotion crashed over her with terrifying, exhilarating intensity. He was actually proposing. She met his gaze again, and in the flickering, ethereal candlelight, his arresting features became otherworldly. Though her heart raced in her chest, she found her mind in a state of stunned clarity. As her tears threatened to spill over, and the man before her swam in and out of focus, two unexpected voices suddenly echoed through the night. It was Ares and Zahara. Ares spoke first. "Say yes. What am I, if not evidence of your eternal love?" Then Zara chimed in. "I don't even have eyes, and I'm still about to cry. Say yes, say yes." With that, the dam holding back Nancy's tears came crumbling down. They traced warm trails down her cheeks as she wept and laughed simultaneously. She looked at Jonathan with enough love for 2 lifetimes and nodded fervently. "Of course I'll marry you, Jonathan. My answer is yes." Relief washed over Jonathan's face, his tense features finally softening. He carefully picked up the delicate ring from the box and slid it onto Nancy's trembling finger, then rose to his feet and swept her up in a fervent embrace. Finally, he brushed the hair from her face and pressed his lips to hers in a passionate kiss. When they finally broke apart, Nancy became acutely aware of the audience that had been silent witnesses to their intimate moment. Her eyes quickly found Esther, whose face was etched with tears of its own. She rushed forward and wrapped Nancy in a heartfelt hug. "My dearest friend, I'm overflowing with joy. After everything you've been through, you finally found your one true love." Nancy's heart swelled with happiness. It was a miracle that she and Esther were even alive, no less that they were able to be together for such a singular occasion in Nancy's life. A pang of sorrow shot through her heart when she realized her parents would never have the opportunity to share in her joy. But as soon as she could, she would visit Jacob and tell him their wonderful news. Jonathan smiled wryly. "See, I told you I'd get my wish." His casual endearment set Nancy's heart aflutter. She returned a smile, and her eyes twinkled playfully. Sounds like a wasted wish to me. I would have said yes regardless. He raised an eyebrow. You're that anxious to marry me, are you? Nancy gave Jonathan a playful shove, and he turned around to cut the cake. As she handed out slices to everyone, Nancy noticed that Latham seemed lost in thought, a sharp departure from his normally boisterous self. When she handed him his slice of cake, a wistful smile curled onto his lips. Thanks, sister-in-law. Esther eyed him from nearby. Well, you certainly adapt quickly. Nancy shifted her attention to Hannah and was momentarily stunned when she was met with a smile so big and radiant it was hard to believe. A single tear trickled down Hannah's cheek, and Nancy briefly questioned whether it was a tear of joy or sadness, before dismissing the idea as ridiculous. Finally, Nancy got to Esther, who admired her ring with a sigh. How is it possible that the girl who had no interest in men, no interest in dating, and no interest in marriage managed to find 2 husbands before I could even find one? Latham overheard her wistful comment and couldn't resist teasing. Not so fast. As far as the state of New York is concerned, you're Olivia. And the last time I checked, Olivia is happily married. No offense, Latham, but I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man on earth. Well, joke's on you, because Olivia said the same thing, and look what happened to her. Latham held up his hand, for he still wore the ring she gave him. Esther shook her head playfully. Her illness really did ravage her brain, didn't it? You say that now, but if you hold out for too much longer, I might end up being your only choice. You're not even my only choice at this party. Esther looked around and locked onto Xavier with a devilish grin. Hey, Xavier, want to be my boyfriend for the night? Or are things getting too serious with that secret girlfriend of yours? I hope she enjoyed her seafood, by the way. A hush fell over the group, and Esther saw Nancy's jaw drop. When Xavier's gaze finally met hers, in a flash of shared surprise, their eyes held for a suspended heartbeat, an unspoken truth crackling between them. Nancy held her tongue, but Latham reveled in the drama, as always. I'm afraid you've overplayed your hand there, Esther. Our Xavier might be on the cusp of matrimony with the heiress of the illustrious Coleman family. Hannah's eyes widened in surprise. Xavier, is that true? All eyes now on him, Xavier took a moment and chose his words carefully. When he finally spoke, his tone was surprisingly light. It's less of a romance and more of an arrangement. So it is true. Be honest, do you have feelings for her? At that moment, Esther plucked a fresh strawberry with her splendidly manicured fingers and fixed her gaze on Xavier before taking a slow, juicy bite. She relished in the gossip and wanted him to know it. Much to her enjoyment, her boldness seemed to make him uneasy. He looked away from her and shook his head. It hardly matters, Hannah. I've barely met her a handful of times. Latham grinned, and his tone dripped with sarcasm. Gee, Xavier, you better slow down on all these spicy details, or you'll steal the romantic spotlight from Jonathan and Maria. Esther considered Xavier's habitual aloofness and found herself nodding. He was an emotional fortress, impenetrable to anyone. In a way, she felt bad for his new girl, but she was mostly thankful that she had accepted who he really was in the nick of time. She'd nearly lost herself in a whimsical chase, but she had come out stronger on the other side, and Xavier's emotional state was no longer her concern. As the remnants of the cake disappeared, Latham seized the opportunity to inject a new round of intrigue into the gathering. Tonight calls for celebration. Jonathan has crossed into his 30s and gotten engaged, so no one leaves until we're all sufficiently merry. Jonathan laughed. Don't let him pressure you into getting cross-eyed, but I have taken care of accommodations for everyone. In fact, I say we turn this into a good old-fashioned sleepover. Jonathan threw an arm around Nancy and hoisted a bottle of wine. What do you say, everybody? They all clinked their glasses in agreement, and Latham's face flashed with inspiration. If it's a sleepover, then how about a game? Esther narrowed her eyes. What do you have in mind? Here's the plan. Let's draw lots and team up. Then 2 teams battle it out with any performance of their choosing, while the other 2 act as judges. We'll repick teams after every round, and the loser will honor the grand tradition of all drinking games. They'll drink. Hannah shot back in a mocking tone. Latham, your constant need to be the center of attention is truly mind-blowing. That's exactly why you better hope you end up on my team. I'm a one-man show. Jonathan held the wine up one more time and shouted over their banter. Let the games begin. The draw for the first round paired Jonathan with Hannah and Esther with Xavier. Nancy and Latham were assigned to be the judges. Rubbing their hands together, Latham turned to Nancy, and a wicked grin played on his lips. He spoke to her, but was loud enough for everyone to hear. What do you think Esther and Xavier will do? Maybe he could be the pole, and she could be the pole dancer? Nancy nodded. Someone find me some singles. Esther rolled her eyes at Nancy and Latham and looked at Xavier with a hint of desperation. What's our play here? Do you have any talents? Just as Xavier opened his mouth to speak, he was interrupted by a phone call. Esther saw the name Sidney Coleman flash on his screen, and he promptly excused himself to take the call. Latham seemed to see his chance for more chaos and jumped back in. Seize the moment, Jonathan. Start the show now, and by the time Xavier gets back, he'll be too late. Not one to be upstaged, Esther snatched up a guitar and gave it a commanding strum. Sinking into a rattan chair, she began a soulful melody that swept through the room, silencing everyone. Within seconds, all eyes were drawn to hers like moths to a flame. Lit by a soft glow of the ambient light, Esther felt like she'd become part of a dream. Half hidden behind her flowing hair, her eyes shimmered with an otherworldly light, and her voice was almost painfully beautiful. By the time Xavier finished his call and turned back to the gathering, the scene had transformed. Esther was in the spotlight, framed by a tree caught in the fiery grasp of autumn. Her performance struck Xavier as deeply personal and inflected with a wisdom that made her seem momentarily ageless. Her nimble fingers danced across the guitar strings and seemed to cast a spell on everyone present. As the song entered its second chorus, her voice seemed to float on the wind, and strands of her hair danced gently in the breeze. Watching with wide eyes, Xavier felt like he was meeting Esther for the first time. For all the years he'd known her, she'd been hidden behind a mask of laughter and intrigue. She had drawn him in, step by step, always charming, but never revealing her true self. Now, as he watched her sing with an intensity that radiated from her soul, he realized she was doing it for someone truly important. The impetuous girl he thought he knew had been replaced by a woman of extraordinary depth, and he was entranced. When Esther's voice wove around the final note, it clung to the air, suspending Xavier in a breathless silence. Setting the guitar aside, she locked eyes with Nancy and tossed her hair alluringly. Consider that song your engagement present. A little incentive, perhaps, for the judge's discretion? Feigning shock, Nancy shook her head. Talent like this requires no bribes. 10 out of 10. Sitting next to Nancy, Latham flashed his brows at Jonathan. You're in hot water, my friend. It looks like Maria's rigged the competition against her own husband. Hannah flinched at the sound of the word husband and turned her gaze to Jonathan. They were supposed to do an intricate flamenco dance they'd learned as teenagers, but the idea of it suddenly made her nauseous. She had managed to maintain her composure so far, but dancing with him would be more than she could bear. Holding back tears, she turned to Jonathan. I'm so sorry. I'm feeling sick all of a sudden. I think I need to sit down. Jonathan looked at her with concern. Let me help you to a chair. No, she shot back, then lowered her voice. I can do it myself. It's fine. As Hannah left the stage, Latham crowed. Jonathan and Hannah lose by forfeit. Drink up, birthday boy. While Jonathan drank for both of them, Hannah took a seat next to Esther and seized the opportunity to change the subject. My God, Esther, is there anything you can't do? Where did you learn to sing and play guitar like that? Esther responded with a modest laugh. My parents insisted. Guitar came to me easily for some reason, but you should see me on piano. I can barely play hot cross buns. As Maria passed, Esther pulled her into the conversation. Now Maria here, she's a real prodigy. She can deliver a third piano concerto with the best of them, and not even use sheet music. You'd be astounded. Hannah glanced at Maria, but it felt like staring straight at the sun. It was the happiest night of her life, and the single worst of Hannah's. To her dismay, Esther went on. And that's not all. She can also play the violin, dance ballet, and speak French. She's practically a force of nature. Hannah responded through gritted teeth. Wow, how do you do it, Maria? When she commits to something, no one can stop her. You should see her work in the lab. I visited and found her elbow deep in grease, tinkering with a car engine. Hannah didn't doubt that everything Esther was saying was true, but that didn't keep every word from hitting her like a knife to the chest. Not only had she never found the courage to tell Jonathan how she felt, it was obvious that it had never occurred to Maria that Hannah might be competition for his heart. She had been avoiding alcohol ever since her embarrassing blackout a few weeks earlier, but seeing Maria bask in the glow of her engagement to Jonathan, Hannah decided to drown her sorrows. Excusing herself from Esther and Maria's love fest, she downed 4 glasses of wine in short order, and with the last shreds of sobriety clinging to her consciousness, she called a car and left the party without so much as a goodbye. Nancy only realized how much time had gotten away from her when she glanced at the clock and saw it was 2 a.m. It occurred to her that she hadn't seen Hannah in hours, and Latham had long since stumbled off to the bedroom Jonathan set aside for him. Xavier went soon after he did, and Esther was the last to go, leaving only Jonathan and Nancy awake. When they finally made it back to their room, Nancy crumbled onto the bed, a prisoner to her overwhelming exhaustion. Jonathan had drunk quite a few glasses of wine himself, gallantly taking on Nancy's penalty drinks all night, but he still summoned the energy to dote on her. After gently helping her out of her clothes, he ushered her to the bathroom to clean off. The steam danced around them in an ethereal haze, and Nancy stared up at him through bleary eyes. Jonathan, did it ever occur to you I might be a demon? For all you know, I was sent back from the dead to destroy you. Jonathan let out a surprised laugh. Well, if you're trying to ruin my life, you're doing a pretty terrible job. That's because you're drawn in with my irresistible charm. Well, you're right about that at least. In a swift move, he hoisted Nancy onto the bathroom countertop, his strong arms circling her waist as he plunged into a searing kiss. With their damp skin pressed together, he whispered in her ear, Darling, let me hear my name on your lips. Mr. Davis. Not that one. Jonathan? Not that one either. Suddenly, realization hit her. She leaned back in Jonathan's arms and looked at him right in the eyes, stroking his cheek. Husband. With that, Jonathan swept her into a fervent embrace, and her journey back to the sanctuary of their bed was a blissful blur. That night, Esther slept soundly for a few hours before she woke up with a start. Nature was calling. She stumbled down the hall in a groggy search for the bathroom, but when she finally exited, her sense of direction had gotten scrambled in the blur of sleep and red wine. She slowly retraced her steps and sighed with relief when she finally found her room. She opened the door and stumbled inside, blindly navigating in the darkness until she found the warmth of the bed. The smell of the sheets surprised her. It was more leather and musk than she remembered, but she wrote it off as drunkenness and allowed the plush mattress to swallow her in its embrace. Esther was abruptly woken from her slumber. her senses assaulted by an oppressive heat that swathed her like a thermal blanket. She pushed forcefully against whatever was pinning her down beneath the blanket, but as she did, a realization shot through her. Whatever was on top of her was another person. The force of her shove seemed to shake the other person awake, and as Esther scrambled out from under the covers, she saw Xavier's eyes snap open. The moment their gazes met, Esther froze. Their faces were inches apart, and all of his limbs were still wrapped around her. She shoved him away and scrambled out of his hold, and her voice came out as a strangled yelp. "What the hell are you doing here?" Xavier shot back, an edge of playful sarcasm in his voice. "I think I'm the one who should be asking that, Ms. Williams." Esther started to reply, but she trailed off as her eyes took in her surroundings. The room was strewn with Xavier's clothes, and there was no sign of anything belonging to her. Xavier's lips curled into a wry smile. "All out of words? Never thought I'd see the day. If you don't mind me asking, what made you think this ridiculous attempt at seduction was going to work?" Caught off guard, and still reeling from her embarrassing misstep, Esther didn't bother to reply. She had obviously wandered into the wrong room after she went to the bathroom the night before, but nothing she said would convince Xavier of that. "What? Not used to men throwing back your lure?" She rubbed her temples in frustration. Xavier's insinuation that she tried to seduce him, and that he was above it, ignited a spark of fury within her. She spun around, her eyes flashing with defiant anger. "Oh, I lured you, did I? Trust me, if I wanted to seduce you, you would know." With swift, predatory grace, she closed the distance between them and snaked her arms around his neck, tipping herself up to his ear. She felt his body freeze under her touch, and her voice dropped to a seductive whisper. "This, my dear Xavier, is what seduction feels like. Committed to memory." She untangled herself and let her hand draw a leisurely circle on his chest before biting her finger and sauntering away. As she reached for the door, she felt Xavier grab her wrist and spin her around to face him. The force of it sent her off balance, and Xavier capitalized on the momentum, thrusting her backwards into the wall. "Xavier!" She barely got his name out before he forcefully pressed his lips onto hers. Her mind raced under his iron grip. She had intended to wound his pride, but she never expected such an outsized reaction from the eternally aloof Xavier. Just as she was about to bite down on his lip, the kiss suddenly softened, deepening into a slow, all-consuming burn that seemed to stop time. Before she could process what was happening, the sharp trill of his cell phone brought the kiss to an abrupt halt. Xavier pulled back, and his gaze locked onto Esther's. "Say whatever you want, but we both know you're just hurt that I refuse to be one of your conquests." Esther's eyes flashed with rage, but her lips curled into a dazzling grin that contradicted the sharp sting of her words. "Don't flatter yourself, Mr. Sloan. I couldn't care less what you do. And before you go wooing any heiresses, you should probably know your technique needs a little work. Take it from the seductress." Xavier's face fell into a stormy scowl, and she jabbed her finger into his chest. "Save your posturing until you know what you're doing. When you're not quite so pathetic, maybe you'll finally be worth my time." His grip on her wrist tightened, but Esther kept her composure, clicking her tongue at him. "Tisk, tisk, Mr. CEO. What would the papers think if you left a mark on a poor, defenseless woman who was too drunk to consent? You wouldn't dare. I own half your company." "Companies are like men. I get tired of one, I find another." With a final, defiant pull, she freed her arm from his clasp and stormed out of the room. Esther finally made it back to her room and flopped down on her bed, mulling her options. Her first instinct was to slip out before things could get any worse, but she slowly reconsidered. All she'd done was make an innocent mistake, and even if Xavier would never believe that, if she left now, she'd only look more guilty. She refused to give Xavier that victory. Suddenly, Like a ray of sun through a thick layer of clouds, inspiration struck. Esther sprung out of bed and fetched a pen and paper from her bag. It had been over 2 years since ENN had revealed a new design, and it was time to emerge from the shadows. Engrossed in her sketches, her frustration was supplanted by the comforting rhythm of her own creative process. As dawn unfurled its radiant tendrils across the sky, Jonathan was getting dressed in front of his mirror. Midway through knotting his tie, his phone chirped, and when he glanced down at it, he found a birthday message from Kim. "Happy birthday, Jonathan. Sorry I couldn't get you anything this year. I promise I'll make it up to you." Jonathan's lips curved into a smile, and he tapped out his response. "Thank you, Kim, but the greatest gift of all is your continued recovery. Since you couldn't be here, I want you to be the first to know that I proposed to Maria last night, and she agreed to marry me." Just as he was about to put his phone away, a knock echoed through the room, and one of his aides spoke up. "Sir, your nephew just arrived. He's waiting for you in the living room." Setting his jaw, Jonathan finished with his tie, swung the door open, and stepped out into the main room. Steve was sprawled casually on the couch, but as soon as he saw Jonathan, he leapt to his feet and handed him a gift. "Happy birthday, Uncle. I had hoped to make it for your party last night, but you know how those long-haul flights can be. How's everyone? How's Maria?" Anger flashed across Jonathan's face at the mention of Maria, but it quickly softened into a reassuring smile. "No need to apologize. I'm just glad you made it in one piece." He narrowed his eyes and looked Steve up and down. "You look thin. Have you lost weight?" "Nothing to worry about, just the rigors of the job. Speaking of which, here's the report you asked for. Ahead of schedule and under budget as promised." Not long after Jonathan stepped out, Nancy roused from her sleep. She wanted nothing more than to stay in bed all day, but the distant sound of conversation drew her from her cocoon. She quickly changed into a robe and swung the bedroom door open, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes as she stepped into the living room. "What's everybody doing up so early? Can a girl get some sleep around here?" As she pulled her hands from her eyes and scanned the room, she suddenly froze. An eerie quietude swept through the room, and a chill ran down her spine. She walked out of Jonathan's room in her pajamas, and immediately locked eyes with the last person she was expecting to see, Steve. Her mind raced to find words that might cut through the tension, but she found herself speechless. When she first got the impression that Steve developed feelings for her, she decided to break the news of her relationship with Jonathan as gently as possible. But she should have known that Jonathan wouldn't settle for such an easy letdown. The situation had spiraled out of her grasp, and before she could think of what to say, Steve redirected his gaze to Jonathan. "What is Maria doing here?" Steve felt his voice waver as he struggled to remain calm. His question hung ominously in the air before him, like a desperate plea for an alternate reality. He was willing to accept any outcome, suspend any disbelief, as long as it wasn't the nightmare unfolding before him. With his typical gravitas, Jonathan took a breath and met his heated stare head-on. "Let's cut through the pretense, Steve." Jonathan's calmness sent a jolt through Steve's body, and before he knew what he was doing, his hand transformed into a fist, and he lashed out toward Jonathan. Quick on his feet, Jonathan avoided the blow and remained calm. "We had no intention of playing you for a fool. I intended to tell you last night with everyone else, but you couldn't make it. Now, regarding the matter at hand." Steve's anger took control of him, and he launched another attack on Jonathan, only to be parried away more forcefully. He locked eyes with Jonathan, his voice pulsing with the sting of betrayal. "Why would you do this to me?" Then he spun around, directing his wrath at Lassam. "And you were in on this too, weren't you?" Memories flooded back in waves of agony. The meeting at the Diamond Club months ago, which now seemed suspiciously orchestrated. Jonathan, Xavier, Maria, they were all there, plotting a scheme he was oblivious to. Then there was Jonathan's hurried departure with Nancy from her father's birthday. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with devastating speed. Jonathan and Maria had been together for months, and everyone knew but him. He turned his ire back toward Jonathan. "When did this start? Don't lie to me." "It wasn't a casual fling, and it wasn't done to hurt you. After the incident on the island, I pursued her incessantly. She never disrespected you, and by the time I won her over, it was obvious to everyone that your relationship had been a sham from the start." "You've been together since my birthday?" Steve's forehead throbbed with pulsing veins as he shouted out a vicious laugh. "The woman I saw with you at the hospital, it was her, wasn't it?" Jonathan confirmed with a silent nod. Knowing they had been together right under his nose like that ignited a fire in Steve's chest. He snarled and grabbed a fistful of Jonathan's collar. "Stop pretending you did nothing wrong. You stabbed me in the back, and you banned me to the middle of nowhere in Mexico to clear your path, didn't you? Here I thought I was doing actual work." "Calm down, Steve. We both know you and Maria never had a real connection. It was all contractual, and you treated her worse than you would a dog. This fury of yours is just a bruised ego. Take a deep breath, and let's talk like adults." "Calm down?" Steve's laugh echoed around the room, dripping with contempt. "My girlfriend just walked out of your bedroom, and you want me to calm down?" He abruptly wheeled around, locking his gaze onto Maria. "Reveling in your triumph, Maria? Both Davis men ensnared in your web. Is that it?" She floundered for words. I never intended to trick you. I know how bad this must look. But we both knew our relationship was an arrangement, and I broke up with you as soon as I realized what I wanted." Steve's gaze skimmed over her pajamas, and he couldn't stop himself from imagining her in bed with Jonathan. The image made his inside seethe, with a volatile mixture of heartache and hatred. A day ago, he was soaring high on the thrill of coming home, to see Maria and confess his true feelings for her. Now, it was all a cruel mockery, a sick game that had cast him as a foolish spectator to his own life. His fists clenched, and his heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know how yet, but one day, he was going to make them pay. Steve clenched his fists as the massive, invisible weight of Jonathan's revelation bore down on him. Fearing he might lose control at any moment, he charged to the door to make his exit. But just as he got there, his hand brushed against a familiar box in his pocket. It held the jewel he had purchased for Maria from a local artist in Mexico. He'd been struck by its beauty, and the image of Maria wearing it had been on his mind ever since. He had dreamt of gifting it to her, of confessing his feelings and holding her close. Now, the box crumpled under the strain of his white-knuckled grip. On reaching the doorway, he drew out the box and revealed the necklace. The light caught the purple crystal pendant, sending prismatic rays dancing along the walls. With a sudden surge of rage, he seized the end of the necklace and yanked. The delicate chain snapped, and the crystal tumbled to the floor, shattering on impact. It was as if the fragments mirrored his own heart. Without a backwards glance, he stormed off toward the elevator. At the sound of something shattering, Nancy and the others rushed to the doorway. They watched Steve depart in shocked silence, with the remains of the purple crystal glittering on the floor before them. Jonathan turned to Nancy, taking her hand into his. "It's going to be okay, Maria. Steve is in the throes of shock. He just needs time to digest everything. I'll talk to him again when the time is right." Nancy managed a small nod, her gaze falling onto the sparkling remnants of the crystal. She instantly knew it was meant for her, and a wave of regret washed over her. But she also knew it was better that the truth had finally come out. She hoped that the sting of Jonathan ripping the Band-Aid off would ultimately make it easier for Steve to move on and find happiness. The air at the breakfast table that morning was heavy with unspoken words. Esther finished her meal first and stood. "I have to get to a press conference, so I guess I should be going." She threw a cautionary glance at Jonathan. "Take care of my darling Maria. Or else." Jonathan laughed and nodded. "I would never think of crossing the great Sabrina." Latham and Xavier left soon after that, and Xavier paused in the doorway. "You know if you ever need me, I'm just a call away." "I appreciate it. but I trust Steve to maintain his professionalism. He'll finish the project in Mexico." When the house finally emptied, Jonathan and Nancy retreated to the couch. Nancy couldn't stop replaying the fight with Steve in her mind, and Jonathan seemed to sense her discomfort. He took her hand and spoke in a soothing voice. "Maria, don't torment yourself. It was only a matter of time before Steve found out, and it was always going to sting at first. You've done nothing wrong." Nancy nodded, her words a whisper. "I hope he finds peace." Their conversation flowed for a while longer before Jonathan broached the elephant in the room. "Have you thought about what's next? Would you prefer to move in here, or should we start fresh in a new place?" "I thought we'd be moving into my dorm." Jonathan smirked. "If you insist, I'll just buy the whole building, and we'll convert it into a palace." Nancy laughed gently, but her mind raced with unspoken thoughts. She was thrilled at Jonathan's proposal, but his unexpected timing had spun her world off its axis. She still had things to accomplish, and they still had to come first. Gathering her resolve, she spoke into the charged silence. "I think we should hold off on our marriage." Jonathan's eyebrows arched in surprise. "I don't seek revenge against Stark out of blind anger. I intend to be calculated, to rip away his mask of deceit and let the world see him for the monster he is. If we rush into this, into a grand spectacle of a wedding, he'll sniff us out immediately." She paused, her voice remained calm and steely. "Stark is cunning, and he's a ruthless survivor. Once his suspicion is aroused, he'll shut out all outsiders, and gathering evidence will become impossible." To Nancy's surprise, Jonathan took her hand and locked eyes with her, a comforting anger amidst her sea of worry. "I understand, Maria, but I also can't condone you playing with fire. Forget my personal feelings. You know exactly who Stark is. You know he won't hesitate to hurt you if anything goes wrong." "I know. That's why I'm going to start with his business. The Phoenix has turned into a veritable gold mine for him. Within months, my team will be able to do the same for Davis Group. Overnight, we'll steal at least half of his market share and send his investors into a panic." Jonathan grinned. My, Maria, when did you become such a corporate raider?" "I learned from the best." She winked and continued. "Stark's Achilles' heel is his fragile ego. He's plagued by a sense of inferiority. A public embarrassment is his greatest fear. A significant business setback, plus using Amelia strategically, could set them against each other and blow the lid off everything." Her voice softened as she met Jonathan's gaze. "I know this plan casts an unfair shadow on you. You shouldn't have to cloak our love because of my mission." Jonathan let out a heavy sigh and pulled Nancy into the sanctuary of his arms. "I've already done it for 6 months. What's a few more? You should know, I've already launched an inquiry into Stark and Amelia, but as you pointed out, he's meticulous in covering his tracks. I can't assure you I'll uncover anything, but I promise to leave no stone unturned." He kissed her on the forehead, and a playful smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Besides, the faster we bring him down, the faster we can get to the altar." Just then, Nancy was hit with a bolt of inspiration. "Jonathan, did you say you have a team in Texas?" He nodded in confirmation. "What are you thinking?" "Stark is unveiling the newest Phoenix model tonight, and it's one of Amelia's last major appearances. What do you think about hijacking their event?" Jonathan's face spread into a wicked smile. "Maria, you're an evil genius." He pulled out his phone and quickly dialed a number. "Jack, call your men. I've got a job for you." Later that night, Stark arrived at the venue where he'd be debuting his car to the world, and the atmosphere was already electric. A legion of reporters bustled in the audience, anxious to take in the Franklin Group's newest technological marvel. As he sat backstage and took in the audience from the wings, Stark found his thoughts subconsciously veering to Maria. He had initially hoped for her to share the limelight with him at this event, but Amelia's contract hadn't yet expired, and he decided it was best not to prod her on her way out. After ensuring that everything was ready to go, Stark returned to his dressing room and decided to call Maria. Little did he know that at that very moment, she was sitting across the table from Jonathan, enjoying an intimate dinner. Nancy picked up her phone, and her eyes widened at the caller ID. "Mr. Green, how are you?" "Maria, always so formal." Stark chided playfully. "What's keeping you so occupied these days?" Nancy feigned a sigh. Just grinding away at my graduation thesis. You wouldn't believe how much work it is." By her side, Jonathan's eyes twinkled with mischief. He closed the distance between them, and his teeth gently grazed her earlobe, a tantalizing punishment. Caught off guard, Nancy let out a sharp intake of breath. Her voice wavered. Stark's reply was laced with concern. "Are you all right?" Regaining her composure, Nancy brushed Jonathan off. "Oh, it's nothing, just a little paper cut." "Such a fragile thing you are. You have to be more careful." "I'm fine, don't worry. Are you prepared for the big event tonight?" "All set. We're about 10 minutes out. I insist that you attend the next one with me. I'll introduce you to all the big industry players. You know, I have much stronger relationships than your friends at the Davis Group." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, and I'll be sure to tune in tonight." "That's what I like to hear." Just then, Nancy heard Amelia's voice in the background. "Stark, who are you speaking with? We're about to go on." Stark's voice came through low and irritated this time. "The spotlight awaits, apparently." "All the best, Stark." Nancy's voice rang with genuine warmth before the line went dead. She turned to Jonathan, and her eyes lit up with anticipation. "Is everything set?" A smug grin spread across Jonathan's face. "Our men are in place and ready for your signal. Shall we go to the living room and enjoy your handiwork on the big screen?" Back at the arena, the audience held its breath as the clock struck 8. Stark soon took the stage to massive applause, and his gaze sparkled with unyielding conviction for the sea of cameras before him. Stark wasted no time, preferring to let the cars speak for themselves. After a brief, enthusiastic address, he dove into all the new features in the upgraded model, including the revolutionary new radar system and an impressive array of new customizations. The spotlight then shifted to Amelia, who sashayed onto the stage to give a live demonstration of the new model's amenities. With the press of a button, the car seats smoothly reclined, and all the speakers came to life with a beautiful, calming rendition of Bach's cello suites. Above the stage, a massive bank of screens showed 3D renderings of the car and slickly designed promos to help demonstrate its capabilities. After a few minutes of Amelia showcasing the car, the screens above her suddenly went dark. When they came back a moment later, they still showed her face, but they no longer showed images of the Phoenix. Instead, the audience saw Amelia inside a dimly lit changing room in a clothing store. A stunned murmur passed over the audience as the video began to play, but Amelia remained blissfully ignorant of the scandal playing out on the screens above her. She savored the noise-canceling properties of the car, while another version of her was caught in a storm of passion with a random stranger. Meanwhile, Stark stood nearby in paralyzed shock. The video was time-stamped to barely 2 weeks earlier, and his face twitched with suppressed rage as he took it all in. Shaking out of his daze, he composed himself and barked out an order to his assistant to kill the screens. Within a minute of the video starting, the giant screen went dark. The sound, however, continued to echo in the hall until it was finally cut too. For a moment, it was as if the air had been sucked out of the massive arena, and an eerie quiet settled over the crowd. Oblivious to the unfolding drama, Amelia stepped out of the car and looked quizzically at the dark screens. "Looks like we've got a bit of a technical error. That's how you know we didn't manufacture the video boards." Her joke was met with total silence, and just as she seemed to understand that something had gone horribly wrong, spotlights landed on both her and Stark. In an instant, the momentary calm gave way to a frenzied uproar. Reporters rushed to the stage, and one group descended upon Amelia, unleashing a torrent of questions about her relationship status, her affair, and accusations of betrayal. Stark, meanwhile, was trapped by another pack of journalists. Blinding camera flashes seared his eyes, while a similar barrage of questions rained down. How can we trust the security of your cars when you can't even secure an event? Why do you think someone did this to you? Have you made enemies? How did it feel watching your girlfriend cheat on you on international television? Stark's chest heaved with rage and embarrassment. He had never had such a massive platform, and now it had turned against him, thanks to Amelia's reckless indiscretion. His facade of composure began to crumble, and as the cameras continued flashing, he clenched his fists and let out a primal shout. He had no doubt who was behind this. The person who had saved Jacob had declared a war on him, and he would stop at nothing to find and destroy them. Not half an hour had passed since the video's scandalous broadcast, when media companies around the world erupted with the breaking news. Franklin Group's star-studded event overshadowed by lurid sex tape featuring CEO's celebrity girlfriend. Security meltdown in Franklin Group, cracked firewall, or an inside job. Naturally, social media and online news sites were even worse. Is Stark the most famous cuckold ever? Amelia's sex tape equals fake publicity stunt. At the same moment, security teams were finally managing to clear the stage and pull Stark and Amelia to safety. Amelia looked back at the ravenous press with blind hatred, but she was quickly doused with a chilling wave of fear when she locked eyes with Stark. His icy stare sent a shudder through her. Her voice quivered, her words barely a whisper. Stark, I'm sorry. I don't know how this happened. Stark responded with only a cold smirk before storming off. Stark didn't take the stage again, but when the audience finally settled down, he sent the company's vice president out to deliver a brief statement. He assured the press that Stark and Amelia would both be made available for comment, but only once a full investigation into the incident had been mounted. While his vice president took the heat, Stark snuck out the back of the venue and retreated to his mansion. Media were waiting out front, but they were no match for his personal security team. When he finally made it inside, he found Amelia waiting for him, still wearing the same clothes. Her voice echoed with desperation. You have to believe me, Stark. I have no idea how this happened. This whole thing was some kind of disgusting setup to bring me down. Stark leveled a cruel grin at her. Cut the crap, Amelia. I know all about your private affairs. I just thought you'd have the good sense to keep them private. But Stark cut her off with a wave of his hand. You can't even begin to comprehend the amount of damage you've done. You've set this company back years, possibly more, and you've damaged my reputation in a way that can never be fixed. Stark's calmness seemed to drive Amelia into a frenzy. She grabbed Stark's arm, and her fingernails dug into him through his sleeve. That's not true. We can make it out like we're the victims. I mean, we are the victims. I must have been drugged when that video got made, and it was all a scheme by one of your rivals to hurt the company. Abruptly, Stark yanked his arm free, his voice as biting as a winter gale. All right then, enlighten me. Who's this puppet master? Amelia narrowed her eyes. You don't think? Could it be Maria and the Davis group? It makes so much sense. Silence! Stark grabbed Amelia and shoved her against the wall, clasping a hand over her mouth. I know you tried to have her killed. I told you not to interfere in my relationships, but here we are yet again. Stark yanked a roll of duct tape from a drawer, and Amelia looked at him in terror. Don't worry, darling. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to give you some time to think about what you've done. With that, he stretched tape over Amelia's mouth, bound her hands behind her back, and shoved her into a windowless closet, locking the door behind her. By the next morning, the fallout from the calamitous unveiling had escalated into a maelstrom. The start of trading on Wall Street saw the Franklin Group shares price drop by 15%, and large portions of the media began calling for Stark to resign. With the vultures swarming, Stark saw no other choice but to call a press conference. He invited the company's board and a few high-ranking journalists. And as he strode into the austere boardroom, he was met with a wall of angry faces and blinding flashbulbs. Taking a deep breath, he addressed the room. I'm here today to announce that Amelia Renner has been fired for cause. She's unfortunately had a complete mental breakdown, and as we speak, she's on her way to a rehab facility in Arizona. I regret that her demons led her to concoct such a destructive cry for attention, but myself and this company have survived far worse tragedy, and will survive this one the same way, by praying for her recovery, and asking our customers and shareholders to empathize with a sick woman in desperate need of help. Stark paused and looked around the room. His furious board members looked placated, and the press just looked bored. They were right back where he wanted them. With a slight grin, he unveiled a poster of the new Phoenix fleet. Now then, I still have a revolutionary piece of technology to share with everyone. Back in New York, Esther had just finished an interview at the Unique store when she got a call from Nancy. Hey, how's life as an engaged woman? Shh, you haven't told anyone, right? Relax, girl. No one wants revenge on Stark more than I do. Well, maybe you, and Jacob, and probably Jonathan. But I'm at least in the top 5. Speaking of Jonathan, he's going to his sister's birthday party tonight, and I can't go because of the whole Steve thing. Want to meet me for dinner? Esther replied with feigned shock. What? The Queen of New York would deign to spend an evening with the likes of me? Stop it. You know how busy I've been. I did see the meltdown in Houston. You happen to have something to do with that? Nancy laughed and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial rumble. Get dinner with me, and I'll tell you everything. All right, but you're paying. I'll meet you at the usual place in an hour. I just have to finish up a few things here. Ending her call, Esther's gaze drifted across the store, only to freeze on a familiar face. Xavier. His face flashed with surprise as they recognized each other, then quickly resumed its typically impassive demeanor. Esther initially thought about sneaking out the back, but when she saw who Xavier was with, she suddenly changed her mind. Trailing behind him was the woman he'd been set up with, Sydney Coleman, and his mother. Esther took a moment to watch Sydney, and she had to admit she was impressed. She looked incredible for 25, and her youthful enthusiasm was infectious even from a distance. Moreover, she wore a subtle but extremely fashionable jumpsuit with heels and an intricate updo. If Esther weren't locked into a strange competition with her, she imagined she would have liked her. Besides, Esther was confident she wouldn't be outshined. Because of her interview, she was dressed to the nines and looked nothing short of radiant. Her hair flowed like an undulating river, and her crisp white dress teemed with vibrant pink hills, painting a dazzling image as she slowly made her way behind the counter where Sydney was shopping. When Esther finally got close enough to hear their conversation, she could hardly contain a self-satisfied smile. The subject that had gotten Sydney so animated was no other than the new E&N bag that Esther had teased that very morning. Their excited murmurs seemed to spread around the store, and before long, people were loudly discussing it. Little did Sydney know, but the new E&N bag had been designed specifically in response to Xavier's behavior at Jonathan's house. It was fire red, and its surfaces flowed together like lava. The buzz about her creation echoed around her, but she feigned indifference. Her safety required her to retain at least some degree of autonomy. At that exact moment, Sydney and Teresa spotted Esther and froze in their tracks. Sydney's eyes widened in awe. You're Sabrina, right? I saw you on TV. Esther set aside the bottle she had been polishing and smiled warmly. Yes, indeed, I am Sabrina. Sydney's excitement was palpable, like a live wire sparking. I can't believe this. You're like an icon. Do you mind if I take a picture? All my friends are obsessed with you, and they'll never believe me otherwise. Esther nodded and posed for a quick selfie, shooting only the briefest glance at Xavier as he stewed nearby. Sorry I'm gushing, but your perfume, it's really incredible, and you're such an inspiration after everything you went through. Esther nodded, and a light laugh escaped her. You're too kind. Can I just hire you to follow me around? But it's true. You're an actual artist. And I can't say that for many of the people in fashion right now. Well, that means a lot to me. I can tell you know what you're talking about. Sydney blushed, then glanced around and stepped closer. Her voice trembled with eagerness and adoration. Sabrina, could I ask you a favor? A bemused smile curled at the edge of Esther's lips. And what might that be? I know I'm a total stranger, and your personal designs are usually reserved for people like Beyoncé, but I really am so captivated by your work. Sydney stammered, her eyes dropping to her clasped hands. I'm getting engaged soon, and there's nothing I'd love more than having one of your signature scents for my wedding. Would you? Before she could finish her sentence, Esther's soft laughter filled the room. Of course. It's no problem at all. Really? Sabrina, you're a literal angel. Sydney's face was radiant, and her joy was contagious. Finally, she turned to the entrance and called out to Xavier. Honey, come over here. There's someone you have to meet. Xavier looked reluctant, but finally acquiesced, crossing the room to join Sydney and his mother. Sabrina, this is my fiancé, Xavier. Xavier, this is Sabrina. She runs this whole company, and she's going to make a perfume just for me. At her words, Xavier's gaze locked onto Esther's. She gave him a polite nod, then shifted her attention back to Sydney. Why don't you start by telling me some of the scents you like? Xavier watched as Sydney chatted excitedly about her scent preferences to Esther, her joy painting the air with strokes of innocent exuberance. Nevertheless, he found his mind wandering to the scent that clung to Esther. It was a refreshing, sweet aroma that soothed and transported him in a way he'd never experienced. He was only snapped out of his daze when Esther took Sydney by the arm and guided her deeper into the shop, taking her extraordinary scent with her. As she watched them walk off, his mother suddenly appeared next to him. She nudged him with her elbow and smiled encouragingly. I know you were skeptical, Xavier, but Sydney really is a catch. And her lively personality is such a pleasant contrast to yours. She'll keep you young. Teresa winked, but Xavier only replied with a soft smile. A while later, Esther and Sydney returned from the back, and Sydney's face glowed with exhilaration. Esther wore a look of polite satisfaction, but whenever she made eye contact with Xavier, he could tell she was only doing it to taunt him. I'm so glad you're happy with it, Sydney. Your custom perfume will be ready within a week, well in time for your engagement. Sydney's eyes sparkled like stars, brimming with anticipation. I can't believe it! As she turned to depart, Esther locked eyes with Xavier one last time. My sincerest congratulations to the groom. I hope you enjoy her scent as much as she does. Xavier fought to control his temper, allowing Sydney to lead him out of the store. When they made it outside, her expression suddenly fell into regret. Oh my God! I wasn't even thinking. We should have asked her to make a cologne for you too. How wonderful would it be to have matching scents at our wedding? Xavier merely shrugged and stared off into the distance, his voice soft yet firm. I don't really care about perfume. That evening, all of New York's high society converged to celebrate Sophia Davis's 50th birthday. Sophia had decided to hold it in her towering Manhattan residence rather than her Hamptons estate, and the allure of the occasion drew the wealthy and influential from all parts of the city. Unable to take Maria, Jonathan asked his niece Rose to attend in her place. They arrived early so Jonathan could talk to Steve, but as the clock edged closer to the party's official starting time, Steve was conspicuously absent. Just as Jonathan was about to reach for his phone, Steve staggered in. Jonathan and Steve had practically grown up together, and he couldn't think of a single time he'd seen Steve look so bad. He was wearing the same clothes as the day before. His hair was disheveled, and the fatigue etched on his face couldn't be hidden by even the dim lighting. Seeing him in such a state, Jonathan tried to pull him aside. Steve, pull it together. If not for me, then for your mom. You think this is how she wants you to look on her birthday?" Steve stared back at him indifferently, then turned away and vanished into the crowd without uttering a single word. Sighing, Jonathan sought out Rose, and they made their way out front to welcome guests. Sophia radiated joy as she showed people in, and before long, a trickle turned into a deluge. Each new celebrity arrival generated a wave of buzz, and her guests' generosity was as abundant as their numbers, showering her with opulent gifts. Even by New York standards, it was becoming an incredibly lavish event. Amidst the clamor of the gathering, an arresting duo made their entrance. Brock was a vision in a vintage suit, and the woman next to him radiated boldness. Their flawless faces, commanding presence, and impeccable attire drew the attention of the entire room. With effortless charm, Brock sauntered over to Sophia and handed her a gift. "Sophia, such a pleasure to see you." "As always, Mr. Porter, and this must be your sister." She introduced herself with a polite but icy smile. "A pleasure, Sophia. My name is Ashley." "And you're just as stunning as your brother. Make yourselves at home, and be sure to find Jonathan before you go. I'm sure he'll be anxious to catch up." Despite their unfamiliarity, Brock and Ashley quickly garnered a crowd, and before long, Jonathan noticed. He narrowed his eyes as he watched them charm Sophia's family and friends. Why had she invited them? Did they share some connection he was unaware of? Or was it just wealthy people running into all the same social circles? Jonathan's investigation into Brock's family hadn't revealed much, but he did know about the strategic marriage 34 years ago between Brock's father, who was Brazilian, and an American woman named Mia. By all accounts, it was a loveless marriage, but it brought their families extraordinary wealth. They poured that money into a holding company called Obsidian Industries and had since passed that company on to Brock. From what Jonathan could tell, Obsidian was a mix of legitimate business interests and brazen fraud. They were based in Brazil, but had recently become focused on expanding their businesses in New York and Mexico. As he considered what connection this could possibly have to his sister, Brock locked eyes with him and stepped over. "Mr. Davis, great to see you again, and without the wheelchair this time. This is my sister, Ashley. She recently joined me here from our headquarters in São Paulo." Jonathan replied with a polite nod. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Porter." Ashley inspected Jonathan with a scorching gaze before offering him a gloved hand. "A pleasure, Mr. Davis." Their exchange was as brief as it was courteous, and Jonathan soon excused himself to continue working the room. As soon as Jonathan was out of earshot, Ashley swiveled toward Brock, her voice breathless with excitement. "I have to have him." Brock's forehead creased in a frown. "That's dangerous territory, Ash." She scoffed. "You're just jealous, because he's the only one here getting more attention than you. I mean, look at him, Brock. He's magnetic. If he's dangerous, I don't want to be safe." "You're wasting your time, okay? The rumor is he's taken, and he wouldn't let that spread if it wasn't true. Besides, we can't forget why we're here." Despite Brock's admonishment, Ashley's eyes stayed locked on Jonathan's retreating figure. "Relax, brother. Your mission is your mission. Now I just have one too." "You're not a child anymore. You know how this works. Our parents need you to bring the Volt family closer, and they have a son your age. Besides, haven't you heard about the Davis curse? First of all, never mention Ted Volt to me again. He's about as intriguing as watching paint dry." She finally tore her gaze away from Jonathan and faced Brock. "But what's this curse you're talking about?" "Every male Davis in Jonathan's generation has died at 32. Jonathan just turned 30, so it's safe to say the clock is ticking." Ashley laughed, and her eyes gleamed with defiance. "I'm not interested in superstition. What I am interested in is seeing if Jonathan's carpet matches the drapes." On the other side of the room, Steve made a quiet re-entrance in a fresh set of clothes. Despite his best efforts, he carried a shadow of exhaustion that was hard to hide. Sophia promptly excused herself from a nearby conversation and stepped over with a concerned look. Son, if you're not feeling well, you should rest. No birthday is more important than your health. She glanced around, then continued in a soft mutter. You're surrounded by bullies and vampires. They take advantage of kind souls like you and work you until you're dead. I saw the exact same thing happen with your uncles. It's barely been 2 months, and you've turned into a walking skeleton. Steve dismissed her concern with a shake of his head. I'm fine, Mom. Really. As Sophia fussed over Steve, Chloe suddenly interjected. Happy birthday, Sophia. And look who made it all the way from Mexico. Chloe's eyes swept over him, and concern filled her face. You've lost so much weight. Must be quite the ordeal, huh? Sophia sighed heavily. See? Even Chloe sees it. Why don't you two spend some time together? Maybe Chloe can talk some sense into you. Sophia continued flitting among the guests, while Chloe sat down next to Steve. You look like you haven't been sleeping. Do you want something for it? I'm sure my dad would be happy to help with a prescription. Chloe rubbed Steve's arm gently, and he finally looked over at her. Her light blue dress highlighted her fair, glowing skin, but when he looked in her eyes, he saw someone else's face. Maria's. His hand instinctively clenched into a fist, and he pulled away. But he quickly shook off the hallucination and remembered who he was talking to. Sorry, Chloe. I appreciate the offer, but I sleep fine when I'm not traveling. Chloe's face dawned with realization. Of course. The jet lag. When do you fly back? 2 days. Does it have to be so soon? This project waits for no one, apparently. Brock watched Steve and Chloe's interaction from nearby and cocked a smile. See, if you want to chase Steve, I wouldn't have a problem. Ashley smirked. Do you really think Steve could handle me? He's like a sad puppy, too easy to control. Love isn't about control. Who said anything about love? I'm just saying, Jonathan may be impressive, but he's ruthless too, and I don't want you to end up as collateral in a battle over money. Ted Volt may not be your equal, but he's safe and rich. I thought you would have learned by now that the more you try to talk me out of something, the more I want to do it. Ashley popped out of her chair and headed toward the dance floor. You're a terror, sis. I know. With a wink, Ashley disappeared into the crowd. Meanwhile, Jonathan led Rose in a dance at the middle of the dance floor. He accidentally stepped on her toe, and she yelped in pain. Sorry, Rose. I'm used to dancing with Maria, and her steps are always the exact same. That's all right. I'll get you back next time you're in the dojo. Where's Maria anyway? Jonathan sighed. Our affair has to stay confidential for now. Don't mention it to my sister either. A secret love affair? How scandalous. I'm serious, Rose. Rose rolled her eyes. Don't worry, it's safe with me. The song soon ended, but as Jonathan turned to leave the dance floor, a statuesque figure intercepted him. It was Ashley. With heels on, she was nearly as tall as him, which combined with her model-esque physique made her difficult to look away from. She projected an icy, dangerous allure, the kind that draws looks from all over the room, while simultaneously repelling all but the most daring advances. He locked eyes with her, and she flashed her eyebrows seductively. Mr. Davis, may I have this dance? Jonathan nodded. Of course. As they started their dance, their magnetic pull and striking figures drew the attention of everyone in the room. They spoke in low tones, as if their intricate steps and acrobatic dips were a walk in the park. You're new to the city, is that right, Miss Porter? Indeed, just last weekend. My only regret is that it took so long for me to get here. It's an incredible city. I'm not surprised your brother chose it for his new headquarters. Tell me, was it Steve who invited you tonight? Sophia, actually. She's a friend of my mother's. And just how long do you plan to grace our city with your presence, Miss Porter? Please, call me Ashley. And if fate consents, I'm here indefinitely. Planning to take a bite out of the Big Apple, are we? Your words, handsome. Ashley winked and gnashed her teeth, her icy gaze ensnaring Jonathan's. He chuckled and played into her innuendo. Be careful out there. Not everyone plays as nice as me. Now, we both know you don't play nice, Mr. Davis. Their dance concluded with the final strains of the song, and Jonathan excused himself. If he'd spared a look behind him, he would have seen Ashley standing perfectly still in the middle of the dance floor, watching him with ferocious intensity. The party continued until well after midnight, when Jonathan helped his weary sister to bed and made his way back to his own apartment. Steve, on the other hand, remained up until the last toast had been raised and the last guest had said goodbye. He'd hoped all the whiskeys would have blurred his painful memories, but it only seemed to burn them deeper into his soul. As he wandered the empty halls, nursing his final glass of scotch, a soft voice called out to him. Fancy seeing you here. Chloe emerged from the shadows and stepped close enough for Steve to feel her breath on his neck. My mother had a few too many, so Sophia offered her a bed to sleep in. Now that we're alone, care to join me for a nightcap? Here, you can have mine. Steve handed her his whiskey and continued toward his bedroom. Once he found his room, Steve made a beeline for the toilet and retched until his stomach had nothing more to give. He rinsed his mouth and washed his face, then stumbled into the bedroom and collapsed on the bed. When the door creaked open a few minutes later, the room was shrouded in the inky depths of night. Chloe slipped inside and shut the door behind her before edging closer to Steve's bed. She whispered to him until she was sure he was asleep, and then climbed in bed beside him. Her heart pounded in her chest as her mother's words echoed in her ears. This is your opportunity, Chloe. Your father's head over heels for that harlot, and he's planning to leave everything to his offspring. And now your brother's been AWOL for a month. If we don't see a dime from the Franklin Group, our only chance is to stay close with the Davies. Very close. With a deep breath, Chloe steeled herself and started undressing Steve. Steve was in a deep, dead-to-the-world kind of sleep, the kind that could remain undisturbed even when the sheets were pulled from under him. A low grunt escaped his lips as he continued to slumber obliviously. Chloe's fingers trembled slightly, but she pressed on. She lowered herself over Steve, and her heart pounded in the stillness of the room. She had loved Steve for what felt like forever, yet he rarely spared her a second glance. She worked tirelessly to make herself shine, to stand out, and capture his attention. As she stood center stage, bathed in the glow of envy, everyone watched. Everyone but Steve. She had given it her all, and she'd grown exhausted with feeling unworthy and insignificant. Her current situation wasn't what she hoped for, but as her 20s slipped by like sand through the hourglass, she'd become truly desperate. There was no turning back now, no time for second guessing. With her heartbeat pounding in her ears, she bent down to kiss him. Steve stirred, and heat flooded her body at his instinctual response. She lay beside him, her mind racing, hoping for his next move. But it never came. An hour passed, and Chloe's mounting anxiety made her hands feel slick with sweat. Daylight was starting to filter through the windows, and if she left the room now, she ran the risk of crossing paths with one of the maids. Not only would her efforts have failed, but she'd be publicly humiliated as well. With a sudden jolt of inspiration, Chloe leapt from the bed and frantically searched the room until her fingers closed around a small knife in the bedside drawer. She glanced at Steve's sleeping face and took a deep breath. With a swift stroke, she cut her finger. The sudden sharp pain brought tears to her eyes, but she held them back as blood welled up and threatened to run onto the floor. She quickly returned to the bed and let her blood drip onto the sheets. With that, she slid back into the bed and waited for Steve to wake up. Early the next morning, Sophia crossed paths with Ruby in the kitchen and they shared a moment of mutual realization. Sophia spoke first. "Did Chloe stay the night as well?" Ruby nodded. "I'm surprised she's not up yet. She's normally such a morning person." "Steve hasn't woken up either. Should we get them moving?" "After you." Steve's room was bathed in the glow of morning sun as it streamed through the French windows. A sudden knock on his door began to draw him from his deep slumber, and a second, sharper knock finally forced his eyes open. Steve immediately felt something was amiss, and a glance downward sent a wave of shock coursing through him. He was stark naked, and entwined in his arms was an equally bare woman. A heavy fog clouded his mind, but as it raced to catch up, an icy chill traveled from his feet to the crown of his head. He had clearly had sex with Chloe, but couldn't remember a single moment of it. Chloe suddenly began to stir as well, but as her eyes fluttered open, she froze at the sight of Steve wrapped around her. A sharp gasp erupted from her mouth, and the sound seemed to draw in whoever had just knocked. The door flew open, and Sophia and Ruby charged in to find Steve and Chloe, both topless and both in a state of shock. A stunned silence fell over the room until Chloe finally reacted. She jerked up the blanket to cover herself and let out a panicked sob. As she backed away from Steve, everyone's attention was drawn to a bright red spot on the sheets. Ruby's jaw dropped, and she stammered, at a loss for words. "Steve! How could you?" Before he could respond, Sophia stepped in. "Let's just take a deep breath. We don't know what happened yet, so let's allow them some privacy, and then we'll all speak in the living room." Just as Sophia and Ruby turned to leave, a male voice intervened. "I heard a commotion. Is everything okay?" Jonathan appeared in the doorway, and everyone fell silent yet again. Chloe cried under the sheets, and Steve wore a look of bewildered agony. Jonathan's eyes eventually tracked to the crimson stain on the bed, and without a word, he ushered Sophia and Ruby out and shut the door behind them. Back in the living room, Ruby was inconsolable. "Why would they be so reckless? What if she's pregnant?" Sophia shook her head. "People make mistakes. Let's not go jumping to conclusions." "Easy for you to say. Chloe adores him, and he clearly took advantage of her." "I agree it doesn't look good, but if it were up to me, they'd already be engaged." Jonathan interjected. "That's enough. They're young and impulsive, and there was a lot of drinking last night. They were bound to lose control." He placed a comforting hand on Ruby's shoulder. "When they come out, we'll ask them what happened. But for all we know, they already planned to get married. But it also isn't 1950. You may not agree with their choices, but as long as she isn't pregnant, you'll have to accept them." Ruby's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Steve entered the room, his body rigid and his face pale. Sophia approached him. "Steve, where's Chloe?" "She's still in the room." His voice was hollow, and he didn't make eye contact. "Ruby and I have discussed it, and we think the best thing for you to do is get engaged. It's clear you're both attracted to each other, and while I wish you had waited, if it finally gets you to pull the trigger, I can look the other way." Steve finally raised his eyes and locked onto Jonathan's penetrating gaze. His chest heaved with anger, and it was clear from his expression that he assumed Jonathan was reveling in his downfall. After all, who had the most to gain from Steve being thrust into a hasty marriage? "Steve, did you hear me?" Sophia sounded concerned, and next to her, Ruby let out a dramatic sob. "It's obvious he has no intention to marry her. I guess this is just how young people behave these days." "Young? He's already 27. She turned back to Steve. "Were you planning on just flying back to Mexico and pretending this never happened? What about Chloe? What happened to her?" Steve's knuckles whitened as his grip on the table tightened, his silence unbroken. Chloe entered the room at the same moment, and Ruby hurried over to console her. "Chloe, sweetheart, if Steve doesn't want to get married, we can't force him. But don't worry, Even if you're pregnant and this ruins your prospects for a long, happy marriage, your mother will always stand by you." At the sound of Ruby's melodramatic words, Jonathan's eyes narrowed and he quietly stepped out of the room. Chloe finally spoke, wiping away a tear. "Don't be mad, Mom. I don't remember anything that happened last night. But if Steve says he didn't take advantage of me, then we should believe him." Then she turned to Steve with an expression of deep regret. "I'm sorry for all of this, Steve. All I ever wanted was for us to be together. But don't worry. Mom and I will leave and you'll never have to deal with me again." Chloe turned toward the door and Sophia shot a glare at Steve, causing him to finally speak up. "Wait, Chloe." A look of profound resignation washed over Steve as he stood to face Chloe and Ruby. He sighed deeply and his lips twisted into a bitter smile. "I admit that I wasn't certain about our future before now, but something clearly happened between us last night, and you deserve to be valued. Given everything that's happened between us, I'd like to ask for your hand in marriage." But before he could finish, Jonathan appeared and cut him off. "Stop." Sophia turned back to him, bewildered. "Can whatever this is wait? We're in the middle of something." "No." Jonathan pushed past Sophia and his gaze locked onto Chloe and Ruby. "I have to say, that was quite a convincing performance, you two." The mother and daughter looked at each other with shock and confusion. Ruby stammered, "Mr. Davis, I have no idea what you're talking about." A hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "I mean exactly what I said. Chloe won't be marrying my nephew, but she might just have a future as an actor after all." "Mr. Davis, how dare you?" Ruby bristled, and her eyes flashed with indignation. "My daughter has been violated, and you have the audacity to accuse her of making it up?" Sophia's brow furrowed. "I agree with Ruby. You're overstepping. This decision is up to Steve and Chloe. And if what Ms. Morgan says is true, I won't stand in Steve's way. But if Steve has been manipulated by someone else's gain, I won't allow him to be used as a pawn." Jonathan stepped up to Chloe and grabbed her wrist. She tried to pull away, but Jonathan's grip was unyielding. "Miss Morgan is a lefty, so she used her left hand to slice her right finger with a knife, then planted the so-called evidence of Steve's wrongdoing on the sheets." He raised Chloe's hand for all to see. The cut is fresh and plainly visible. Chloe looked terrified and glanced at her mother, who was quick to interject. "You're spinning conspiracy theories, Jonathan. She cut herself while she was helping me in the kitchen yesterday." "Is that so? Then why is there blood on this knife I just found in Steve's room?" Suddenly, Chloe's complexion drained of color. She opened her mouth to respond, but words seemed to fail her. Ruby was about to counter again when Jonathan cut her off. Releasing Chloe's hand, he smiled sardonically. "Let's be honest. Chloe is a sweet girl. She would never think up such a conniving plan all on her own." Jonathan's gaze hardened, and Ruby stammered defensively. But Chloe's pallor only deepened, a portrait of shame and humiliation. "Now then, what were you saying about my nephew violating your daughter?" Ruby swayed on her feet as though she'd been punched in the gut. Having heard Jonathan's words, Sophia looked at her with newfound disdain. "I've always treated you and your daughter like you were family. I was prepared to mortgage my own son's future out of trust and loyalty, and this is how you repay us." "Sophia, please. We only wanted Steve to see how much Chloe loved him. He worked so hard, and with him going back to Mexico—" "Silence!" Sophia shouted, staring daggers at Ruby. "Get out of my house and never speak to my family again, or I'll be sure that every man in New York knows what happens when they get involved with your precious daughter." With that, Chloe burst into tears and ran from the room, Ruby chasing after her. An uneasy quiet settled over the room, and Steve glanced up to meet Jonathan's fierce gaze. "Mom, I need to speak with my uncle in private." Sophia nodded and left the room. After a beat, Steve cleared his throat and spoke in a raspy, emotional timbre. "Why did you help me, Jonathan? Wouldn't it make your life easier if you just let me get married? You're my nephew. We may have our differences, but I wasn't going to let you be manipulated into marrying someone you don't love. Steve's eyes narrowed. But you're telling me to abandon the person I do love. Jonathan sighed in resignation. I understand it's difficult to accept that I'm with Maria, but I'm not going to stand here and pretend your love for her is equal to mine. You treated her like an irritation and an inconvenience, while I treated her with respect and adoration. The only person you have to blame for this situation is yourself. Steve fell silent, his gaze fixated on the water in his cup. You have a long life ahead of you. Use the next 6 months to focus on your work and move on. Then, when you return, you can find someone who meets your needs. Jonathan patted him on the shoulder. Travel safe. We'll speak soon. Steve watched wordlessly as Jonathan strolled out, calm and in control as he always was. Steve's grip tightened around his glass, and a storm of emotions raged within him. Because of Jonathan's intervention with Chloe, he had been spared a lifetime of regret. And because Jonathan had stolen Maria, he'd also been guaranteed one. The next morning, Jonathan was so engrossed in work that he remained utterly oblivious to the newest bit of entertainment news catching fire on the internet. The news was about a famous musician who had been spotted with his mistress at Sophia's lavish party. Though it didn't directly concern Jonathan, the photo of the man and his mistress happened to feature him prominently in the background, locked in an intimate dance with Ashley Porter. The report quickly escalated into a trending topic, and it didn't take long before a few sharp-eyed bloggers spotted Jonathan and Ashley. The revelation gave the entire story new life, and by mid-morning, it was at the top of every gossip column in America. After all, Jonathan was one of the richest men in the country, and was famously tight-lipped about his private life. Meanwhile, Nancy had a busy morning at the research lab, and only glanced at her phone when she took a short break for lunch. Opening Twitter, she habitually skimmed through trending topics until she was suddenly taken aback by a headline. Davis Group CEO seen dancing with a mysterious woman. Is this New York's hottest new power couple? Nancy clicked on the thread and scanned 2 photos taken from differing angles. The shots were clearly taken in secret, but she recognized Jonathan's face immediately and narrowed her eyes. He and the mystery woman were clearly the center of attention, and their bodies were pressed against each other as they circled the dance floor. Nancy was struck that the woman was nearly as tall as Jonathan, and it struck that they really did look like a stunning couple. Nancy's stomach churned with jealousy. She had no idea who the woman was, but she'd been to enough of Sophia's parties to know that she wasn't a regular. Nancy frowned at her phone, openly displeased. Peter nudged her with his elbow. What's wrong? You look like someone ran off with your man. She swung a leg to kick him in the shin, and he shot out of his chair. Hey now, it's just a joke. Unless someone actually did run off with your man. Nancy kicked him again, then snatched the candy bar out of his hand and stormed off. Behind her, Emma watched in surprise. What the hell did you say to her, Peter? Who knows? Ladies, am I right? Peter winked, and Emma rolled her eyes. Exiting the lab, Nancy made her way back to the apartment she started renting near the lab in South Brooklyn. It came in handy when she had long nights or early mornings, or in this case, just didn't care to see Jonathan. After buying some groceries at the bodega, she stormed into her building, only to freeze at the sight of a familiar figure by the elevator. It was Steve. Caught off guard, she pasted on a smile and greeted him. Steve, what brings you to Brooklyn? His expression betrayed nothing. What do you think? I know we didn't leave things on the best note. But if you're here to yell at me, I'm not. I just wanted to talk. His tone sounded genuine, so Nancy nodded. All right, let's go to the coffee shop across the street. A long silence stretched between them as they crossed the road and found a quiet table. Finally, Steve cleared his throat and spoke. I'll be heading back to Mexico tomorrow. I won't return for at least 6 months this time, possibly longer. Nancy pondered. You won't be home for Christmas? Or New Year? He shook his head wordlessly, and the silence resumed until Steve got to the point. Are you two really together? Did he pressure you? Nancy took a deep breath and nodded. I'll admit it was strange at first. He was insistent, but he also never faltered. He was totally committed to showing me how much he cared about me. And after a while, it worked. I fell in love with him. Nancy saw Steve's breath hitch at the sound of the word love. As he fought to contain his emotions, a wave of guilt crashed over Nancy. She had guessed that he had feelings for her, but she had no idea it had gotten so serious for him. He swallowed hard. What made you fall in love with him? Nancy took a beat to gather her thoughts, and Steve spoke again, fixing her with a steady gaze. Is it because he's above me at work? Because he's more social? His vulnerability pulled at Nancy's heartstrings, but the version of Maria who had once pined for him was dead, literally and figuratively. It's not about who's more outgoing or who makes more money. He gives me a sense of security. He makes me feel like I could do anything. And when I need his help, he's there before I can even call out his name. Steve nodded gravely. I didn't treat you well, did I? I don't blame you. After all, I forced you into our arrangement in such an awful way. I'd take that back if I could. But anything you did or didn't do for me is water under the bridge as far as I'm concerned. Nancy summoned a genuine smile. When you meet the right girl, you just need to show her a little more care. I know I act tough sometimes, but everyone likes to be wooed, to feel special. You're a handsome man with an incredible job, Steve. If you put yourself out there, you'll find a great girl in no time. Steve took in her words, then abruptly stood up. I understand. I need to go. Nancy nodded. Safe travels tomorrow. Without another word, Steve left. Back at Jonathan's office, he had finally wrapped up a day of meetings and called Maria to see where she wanted to eat dinner. The call abruptly went to voicemail after 2 rings, and Jonathan stared at the disconnected call in confusion. Assuming it was an accident, he called again, only to be hung up on a second time. On the third attempt, it was clear her phone had been turned off. His heart suddenly pounded. What if something was wrong? What if someone else had her phone? Without a second of hesitation, he dialed Jack. Find out where Maria is. Now. Jack acknowledged and reported back moments later. Her security team says she's been at her apartment near the research lab for about a half hour. They assured me she's safe. He remembered calling her that morning to ask if she wanted to meet for dinner, and she had agreed enthusiastically. What could possibly have happened since then? As his mind reeled, he quickly shut his laptop, grabbed his bag, and headed straight to Nancy's apartment. Unlocking the door with his set of keys, he heard the sound of utensils from the dining room. As he rounded the corner, he found Maria taking her last bite of dinner at a table set for 1. He narrowed his eyes. Didn't we agree to have dinner together? Nancy just ignored him. She was obviously upset and looking for attention, so Jonathan wrapped his arms around her from behind. Baby, why are you ignoring me? Did I do something to upset you? Nancy tried to break free but couldn't. Jonathan planted a kiss on her cheek. Just tell me what I did to upset my wife, and I'll make it up to her 1,000 times over. Nancy grunted, and Jonathan chuckled inwardly. Referring to her as wife had at least gotten her to make a sound. He let go and stepped around in front of her, but she just pushed him away and headed for the bathroom. Locked outside, Jonathan stood in the hall trying to decide on his next move when Jack suddenly called. I'm sorry I didn't catch it sooner, Jonathan, but it seems there's a scandal brewing. Jonathan quickly opened the link that Jack had sent him, and realization hit him like a truck. Pictures of him dancing with Ashley had been plastered all over the internet and speculated about endlessly. Maria had obviously seen it, and when he hadn't called her to explain, she assumed the worst. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, he grabbed her hand. Maria, that dance was nothing more than a social obligation. I met her 5 minutes before that picture was taken, and as soon as the dance was over, we didn't say another word to each other. Nancy's lips twitched, but her silence persisted. Her name is Ashley, and she's Brock's younger sister. It struck me as suspicious that Sophia even knows her, so when she asked me to dance, I saw it as an opportunity to get some information. But rest assured, if you don't want me to dance with anyone, it won't happen again." When Nancy still didn't respond, Jonathan decided to try a different tact. He walked to a drawer, grabbed one of her lipsticks, and pulled her close. As she squirmed in his grasp, he applied it to her lips. Then he started a soft instrumental song on his phone, took her hand in his, and started to dance. She frowned and deliberately stomped on his foot, but he didn't flinch or show any signs of pain, merely winking at her and continuing on. He stared at her beneath the crystal lamp and refused to relent. When she finally seemed like she'd had enough and was about to pull away, he released his grip on her waist, bent down, and pulled her head toward his face. Her lips met his cheek, and after a moment, he straightened up. "Look, you've left your mark. I'm yours alone, and now all the women will know it." He gestured to the lipstick stain on his cheek, and Nancy fought back a laugh. Sensing a breakthrough, Jonathan wrapped his arms around her waist and continued to dance. Midway through, he kissed her, smearing her lipstick onto his lips, and then kissed her cheek as well. When the song ended, he led her to a mirror, and their reflection was utterly comical. She smiled at the sight of them covered in her lipstick, and he seized the moment, nipping at her earlobe. "They say there's no argument between a husband and a wife that can't be resolved. If one try isn't enough, then try a second time. If twice isn't enough, then try a third." Nancy pulled her ear away, but this time she was still smiling. Jonathan lifted her up and pinned her against the wall, kissing her fervently. When we have misunderstandings, or hurt feelings or disagreements, I promise I will always try as many times as it takes to make it right. You're stuck with me to the bitter end, my love." With that, Nancy pulled back and looked him straight in the eyes, uttering one single word before throwing herself into a long, passionate kiss. "Good," Mark replied with a sly tone. "Do me a favor. Don't mention that old hag Amelia anymore. After all, comparing you to her would be an insult. Now why don't you go downstairs and make us a snack? We're going to need our energy." Just as Amelia heard Lexi shut the door behind her, the darkness she'd been seething in was replaced by a blinding light. A wave of nausea crashed over her, but with her mouth sealed shut, she could only retch. Stark looked down at her sickly face and sneered. "Are you enjoying this show? If not, don't worry. This is just the first act." Amelia remained silent, gasping for breath through her nose. With a cruel grin, Stark crouched down and ripped the tape off her mouth. "You know, when Nancy walked in on us all those years ago, she at least put up a fight. But all you can do is lay here." "You're a disgusting rat, Stark." Amelia's face was ashen, and she was drenched in a feverish sweat, but her gaze was ferocious. "I've been by your side for so many years, and this is how you treat me?" "I was willing to do whatever it took to get what I wanted, even if it meant killing my adopted sister. What makes you think you're so special?" Amelia smirked. "You keep bringing her up. I'm starting to think you miss her." Stark stared down at her as a gentle smile crept onto his face. "I do miss her. After all, she was more than just my adopted sister. She was my fiancée. In fact, I feel so much regret. I've been trying to think of ways I might make it up to her. Maybe if I make you suffer even more than she did, it might bring her some measure of comfort. What do you think?" Amelia shivered at Stark's psychopathic smile, but still managed to muster a retort. "Don't forget, I'm not as expendable as she was." Stark shrugged. "She survived for 3 years without anyone knowing. I have a hunch that's more than enough time for me to find whatever you're hiding." With that, he slapped the tape back over her mouth and let the mattress fall back down, sealing her in. At that exact moment, Nancy and her team were conducting a crucial experiment in their research lab, one that would determine the very future of the car design they'd worked so hard on. Eduardo was busy running simulations through their algorithm, while Peter completed the final circuit test on the bench. All eyes were glued to their respective monitors, and Nancy anxiously clicked a pen, waiting for the results. Data flashed across the screen for minutes on end until it finally froze. Then it displayed a one-word test result: success, and the entire team shot out of their seats. The technology they spent their entire adult lives working on was finally ready for launch, and it was set to revolutionize the entire field of autonomous tech. Mark rubbed his balding head in disbelief, Amanda squealed with glee, and Professor Benedict sipped his tea with a satisfied smile. They all knew what the successful test meant. They could finally begin testing their system in an active vehicle. Suddenly, Nancy felt her phone vibrate. She'd just missed 3 calls from Jonathan. She snatched her phone up and called him back, unable to contain her excitement. "Sorry, honey. I'm swamped right now. We're going to work through the night." "Sounds a little crazy over there. Everything okay?" "Better than okay. I'll call you when we're done." "Hold on. I have a quick question. Have you ever been to a hot springs?" Nancy stammered, caught off guard by his question. "Well, sure. They're all over the place in Texas, so I used to go on the weekends. It's a great way to relax." "Good to know. Well, make sure not to overwork yourself tonight. I'll see you in a couple days for your birthday." "Thank you, Jonathan." Due to the complexity of integrating their systems into the physical car, it took until the next afternoon to determine whether they'd done it successfully. When they started the car up and it passed its diagnostics, they all let out a shout of satisfaction. They'd finally done it. They'd built their first working prototype. And their success wasn't just the product of 2 months of intense work, but the culmination of years of passion and dedication, both individually and as a team. After 2 days with barely a wink of sleep, exhaustion soon overwhelmed their excitement. Within 10 minutes of their successful test, they all collapsed on the floor. By the time Jonathan arrived at the lab, Maria was sprawled on a couch, snoring. He made his way over to her, bent down, and picked her up. As she took in his smell, she recognized him without even opening her eyes. "You're here." "Keep sleeping, my love. I'll wake you up when we get where we're going." She gave a tired nod, yawned, and was soon fast asleep in his arms. The next time Nancy opened her eyes, the sky was completely dark. Outside, the world was painted with fresh snow, and the car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the dancing snowflakes as they fell. Nancy sat up, her voice still groggy from sleep. "Aren't we headed home?" "I'm taking you somewhere special." Jonathan reached into the back seat to retrieve a down jacket. "Put this on. It's going to be cold once we get out." Nancy looked into the distance, noting faint lights in what appeared to be a wealthy neighborhood outside the city. The car soon came to a stop, and Jonathan helped Nancy out, before leading her up to a rustic home set back from the road. The early November ground wasn't quite frozen yet, causing the falling snow to coat the grass in a delicate layer of frost. When they arrived at the home's entrance, Jonathan inputted a password on the electric pad and a prompt appeared. "Please record a new fingerprint." Nancy looked at him in confusion, but Jonathan just took her hand and pressed it to the pad. Her eyes widened. "Is this yours? Why didn't you tell me about it? Where are we even?" He flashed her a smile, and the door suddenly swung open to reveal a beautifully renovated home with a steaming natural hot spring at the center. Nancy's eyes went wide, and she looked up at Jonathan in shock. "To answer your question, this isn't mine. It's yours. Happy birthday, Maria." Nancy stammered in shock as Jonathan led her inside the villa. "Jonathan, I can't accept this. It's too much." But Jonathan was unswayed. "We'll use it as a retreat when we want to get out of the city. But if you ever want to have your friends or family over, it's yours to do with however you like." As Jonathan shut the door behind her, Nancy took in the expansive living room. It was modern and open concept, punctuated by a few tall, vibrant green plants. The decor, prominently in neutral linen tones, exuded comfort and relaxation. Jonathan smiled at her speechlessness and continued. The hot springs in the middle is totally private and maintains a consistent temperature year-round. He opened the door to the spring, and a rush of humid, fragrant air enveloped them. Steam rose off the water, and Nancy laughed in disbelief. You are so extravagant. Jonathan picked up a document off a small table and handed it to Nancy. Sign here, and it's officially your property. At least until we get married. Nancy grinned mischievously. And what makes you so sure I won't just take the house and then break up with you? Seems like staying with me and getting gifts for the rest of your life is the better deal, but I guess that's up to you. Nancy threw herself at Jonathan and wrapped him in a hug. It's so beautiful. I can't believe you did this for me. If you'd like to thank me, maybe you can give me a tour. I hear the master bedroom is lovely. Nancy playfully pushed Jonathan away, but he wrapped her up and held her close. Now, don't act like a spoiled child, or you might get spanked. Prove it. Nancy looked at Jonathan with a playful glint in her eyes, and without missing a beat, Jonathan threw her over his shoulder and bounded up the stairs. She leaned toward him, her breath tickling his ears. I guess you'll have to teach me a lesson. She heard Jonathan's breathing hitch, and in another instant, she found herself spun around and thrown down on the bed. Jonathan kissed her hard, but she turned away. What kind of father behaves like this? His mouth curled into a wicked grin as he pinned both her wrists over her head with one of his hands. Still talking back, I see. Looks like I need to teach you some manners. She pleaded for mercy through moans of pleasure, and they spent a full hour with their bodies locked together before they both finally collapsed from exhaustion. As they both panted for breath, Jonathan shut off the lights and scooped her into a hug, his voice low but profoundly tender. Happy birthday, baby. The following day, Nancy was scheduled to shoot an ad at the Unique store. As she wrapped up the shoot and stepped outside, she was shocked to see Jonathan heading toward her. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at work? I couldn't stop thinking about you, so I decided to come get my fix. As he took off his sunglasses, he saw that her jacket wasn't zipped and frowned. Aren't you cold? Before she could respond, he knelt down on the snowy sidewalk to zip her jacket, and a rush of inexplicable warmth surged through her. She never imagined someone caring for her the way he did. But she knew she had never felt so safe. Overwhelmed by affection, she leaned down to plant a gentle kiss on the corner of his lips. He smiled at her as he secured the hood of her jacket and pulled her close. Traffic was a nightmare today, so I left my car back at the office. Are you okay with a detour on foot? Nancy nodded, and as they walked down the street arm in arm, she suddenly realized how much she cherished these shoulder-to-shoulder moments with him. The snow from the previous night hadn't ceased, and snowflakes fluttered all around them before landing on her outstretched fingertips and instantly melting. Despite walking through a blustering midday crowd, Nancy became less and less aware of the outside commotion and became completely enveloped in the love she felt for Jonathan. Unbeknownst to them, Ashley Porter had been watching their entire interaction from a car nearby. Her eyes narrowed as they walked off, her gaze locked onto Maria. She snapped off an order to her assistant in the front seat. Look into that woman for me, and find out how she managed to get so close to Jonathan Davis. The assistant nodded in acknowledgement, and as the car pulled away from the curb, Ashley's eyes lit up with realization. Maria's face was plastered across a video board above the entrance to Unique. A smug laugh escaped Ashley's mouth. Even if Maria was beautiful, an ordinary perfume model would be no match for her. Ashley could offer so much more than just a pretty face. She just had to figure out how to get Jonathan to see it. Nancy and Jonathan soon made it back to his office, where Jonathan asked his driver to take them back to the Hot Springs villa. Nancy had invited Esther to see it, and Jonathan had promised her a second birthday surprise when they arrived. When they finally pulled up the driveway a couple hours later, twilight was setting in. Nancy could see two figures standing by the door, and as she slowly approached, her jaw dropped in astonishment. Flanking the entrance were two large, state-of-the-art robot dogs. She knew Jonathan's company had been developing them for years, but she had never actually seen one in action. They immediately spoke up in human voices, giving the whole interaction an uncanny ring. "Hello, madame. Hello, sir." Nancy's eyes sparkled as she took in the technological marvels before her. "Jonathan, these are—" "Impressive, I know. They're the latest product from our other cutting-edge design team. Thanks to all the technology packed inside, one of these dogs alone could replace an entire personal security team." Jonathan patted one of them on the head. "All that's left is for you to name them." Nancy thought for a moment before smiling playfully. "How about we call them Joe and Nathan?" Jonathan shrugged. "If that's what you want. Which is which?" Instantly feeling a pang of regret, Nancy hastily shook her head. No. Let's go with Rex and Rosie. Those were my dogs' names when I was little." "Perfect. I'll run you through their programming later, and obviously you can customize them however you want." Nancy nodded in approval, and just as they opened the front door, another car pulled into the driveway. Esther hopped out and called over to Nancy. "Can you help me with my bags, Maria?" But to her surprise, Nancy signaled Rex and Rosie to take care of it. Esther jumped back in shock as they darted over, collecting the bags, and took them inside. "Jesus Christ! Warn a girl before you send your robotic hellhounds to attack her." "Relax. They'll only hurt you if you try to hurt me." "I take it these are another one of your little creations?" Nancy shook her head and pointed to Jonathan. "They're a new release from his company." "Well, aren't you two becoming quite the power couple? Cars, dogs. What's next? A spaceship?" Jonathan laughed. "Actually, yes. And I'll have one of the dogs sent over to you. Trust me, they're going to change the way we think about security, assistance, everything." Esther narrowed her eyes. "Only if you promise it won't poop on my carpet." "You have my word." Amidst the banter, Nancy led Esther on a tour around the house, then changed into a swimsuit to enjoy the hot spring. Meanwhile, Jonathan sent Xavier a message saying that Esther had brought the handbag he'd asked for, and that Xavier could come get it any time. To his surprise, the doorbell rang less than a half an hour later, and when he swung the door open, he discovered Xavier wasn't alone. He'd brought Sydney with him. "How did you two get here so fast?" Xavier smiled wryly. "Let's just say Sydney here was pretty excited." Just then, she spotted the handbags inside and squealed. "It's so beautiful! I can't believe you were able to get it for us." "Anything for a friend." Jonathan ushered them inside, and Sydney dashed over to a red handbag. "I know it seems silly to get so excited over a purse, but the person who designs these really is a genius. It feels like carrying around a Van Gogh on your arm that you can also store stuff in." Just then, she noticed that there were 3 more sitting right next to her. "Wait, how did you manage to get 4 of these? Getting one is nearly impossible." "Oh, those belong to my girlfriend and her friend. They'll be in from the hot spring shortly." Sydney's eyes gleamed with envy. "Do you know Sabrina personally or something? She's literally famous for being impossible to contact and unwilling to play favorites, even with her wealthiest collectors. She's a total recluse." Jonathan looked confused. "It's that difficult to get one of these?" "The only person with access to this many is Sabrina herself." Just then, Nancy and Esther entered, and Jonathan pointed in their direction. "You're probably better off directing any fashion-related questions to these two." Sydney followed his gesture and gaped at the sight. "Sabrina! You're here too?" Jonathan cocked his head. "I thought you just said you didn't know her." No. This is the Sabrina behind Unique Perfumes. No one's ever seen the other Sabrina, so I'm sure it's just a coincidence that they—" Her voice trailed off as she looked between Esther and the handbags. "Hold on. Are you seriously telling me that Unique Sabrina and ENN Sabrina are the same person?" Nancy grinned. "How do you think I ended up with a closet full of ENN?" Sydney leaped up and dashed toward Esther, flinging her arms around her in a bear hug. "I'm such a huge fan!" Esther staggered back a few steps before reluctantly hugging Sydney back. "If you're a fan, then you already know it's important to keep my identity a secret, right?" "Of course! I won't tell a soul. I promise." Sydney jittered with excitement and turned to Xavier. "Did you hear that? You can't tell anyone you know Sabrina." Esther glanced at Xavier and they locked eyes for a brief moment before Sydney cut back in. "I can't believe it's really you. Everyone online was saying you were dead when there weren't any updates for 2 years, but I always knew you'd come back." Esther smiled reassuringly. "Don't you worry. As long as I'm inspired, I'll keep creating." "And that rumor about Sabrina never playing favorites? That's just people who are jealous of my real friends. Welcome to the club." Sydney's eyes went wide at the suggestion that she and Esther were friends. She stammered speechlessly for a brief moment, but then looked struck by a sudden inspiration. She grabbed both Nancy and Esther by the wrists and dragged them over to Xavier. "Honey, I just had the best idea." "What's that?" "I want to invite Sabrina and Maria to our engagement party." Xavier's face tensed up, and he didn't immediately respond, so Esther stepped in. "I'd be so honored to be there when you two get engaged. How about you, Maria?" "I wouldn't miss it." Xavier shot Esther a terse glare, and she barely managed to choke back a laugh. In a matter of days, she had gone from his pursuer to his tormentor, and she was going to relish every minute of it.